The first thing Jaron Moss noticed when his ship latched onto Haven's Reach was that the docking announcement sounded suspiciously like someone clearing their throat. The second thing he noticed was that the station wobbled, just slightly, as if reconsidering whether it wanted visitors today. Jaron patted the console with the reassuring confidence of a pilot who absolutely did not have a backup plan if the airlock refused to cooperate and told his ship not to embarrass him in public. The lights flickered in what felt like open defiance, but at least the door opened, which was more than he could say for half the stations in the borderless deep. He stepped into the bustling corridor with the practiced expression of someone pretending he knew exactly where he was going, even though the directional signs offered advice like, "This way probably," and "Ask someone else." The bazaar stretched across the central ring like a chaotic festival held together by stubborn hope and questionable wiring. Translation drones buzzed overhead, arguing with each other in 6 languages about the correct pronunciation of the word discount. A food vendor waved a steaming skewer that smelled like someone had cooked a star and seasoned it with regret, promising it would improve bone density and possibly personality. Jaron politely declined, mostly because he liked his bones the way they were and doubted the universe was ready for a personality upgrade. He kept his head down, not because he feared attention, but because Haven's Reach had a habit of recognizing people who didn't want to be recognized. 7 years was a long time, long enough for memories to fade, or at least grow quieter. He intended to keep them that way, but the station had other plans. A small figure stepped into his path with the precision of a security drone, determined to detain illegal snacks. Jaron halted, startled, and found himself staring at a young Ashkari girl, no older than 8, her pale blue skin luminous under the market lights, her long ears elegant and unmistakably curious. She stared at him as though running a diagnostic scan, which would have been fine if she hadn't looked so certain of the results. Jaron attempted a friendly smile that probably resembled mechanical failure and tried to step around her, but she mirrored his movement with unsettling accuracy. After a brief standoff that made them both look like they were performing a confused dance routine, the girl spoke in a calm, serious voice that made the crowd noise seem to fade. "My mother knows you, human." Jaron froze so abruptly that a passing vendor had to swerve, muttering something about reckless pedestrians. The girl continued to study him, tilting her head slightly as if confirming he matched the description. Her golden hair caught the artificial sunlight pouring from the ceiling panels, and for a moment Jaron forgot how breathing worked. Plenty of Ashkari passed through Haven's Reach, but none of them should have known his face. None of them should have used that tone. Quiet, certain, and far too familiar. He cleared his throat, which sounded much less impressive than he hoped, and attempted humor as a survival instinct. "Are you sure you don't mean some other human? There are billions of us. We come in many models." The girl didn't even blink. Clearly she was immune to charm, which meant she would survive adulthood extremely well. "She said you promised to return before the stars went dark," the child replied, as casually as if announcing the weather forecast. Jaron felt the world tilt, and not because of Haven's Reach's questionable structural integrity. He hadn't heard that phrase since Antares Prime, spoken in a voice he thought he would never hear again. Elisara. The name slammed into him with the gentle subtlety of a meteor impact. He tried to form a sentence, but his thoughts dissolved into a scattered mess of memory and disbelief. The girl watched him patiently, the way one might observe a malfunctioning robot and wait to see if it would reboot or burst into flames. What's your name?" he finally managed. "Kaya," she answered, folding her hands with dignified formality, as though she were greeting a diplomat instead of a man currently experiencing emotional freefall. "My mother told me that if you ever came here, I should find you. She said you would try to pretend nothing was wrong and that I should not allow that." Jaron blinked. "Great, perfect, wonderful. She remembered me exactly." The child nodded, satisfied she had accomplished phase 1 of whatever mission she was patiently executing. Without warning, she turned and began walking toward the inner corridor, pausing only long enough to glance back with mild expectation. Jaron hesitated, weighing his options, though realistically he had none. Haven's Reach had always been a crossroads, a place where people arrived with the intention of moving on, but rarely did. He had come here to disappear for a while, maybe fix his ship, maybe pretend the past didn't exist. Instead, he found himself following a small Ashkari girl through the crowded passageway, feeling as though the station itself had closed a hand around his shoulder and gently said, "Not this time." As they moved deeper into the temple district, the lights dimmed into soft amber, and the air filled with the low hum of ancient machinery, older than any star chart he'd ever studied. Jaren tried to break the silence before it crushed him. "Just so we're clear," he whispered, "if your mother is waiting to yell at me, I'd like advance notice. Humans require emotional buffering." Kaya didn't laugh, but her ears twitched, which he decided counted as encouragement. He kept walking, and for the first time in 7 years, he realized he wasn't ready for the answers waiting ahead. But he was already too far to turn back. Kaya walked with the determined stride of someone who had absolutely no doubt the universe would move out of her way. Jaren followed with the stride of someone who suspected the universe was about to file a complaint. The temple district was quieter than the bazaar, but no less strange. Glowing symbols drifted across the walls like lazy fireflies, occasionally rearranging themselves into messages that Jaren was pretty sure said things like, "Don't touch that," and "Seriously, stop touching things." He kept his hands firmly to himself, just in case. They passed beneath a wide archway carved into the shape of interlocking stars. A pair of Ashkari priests stood on either side, wearing flowing robes that shimmered like liquid moonlight. One of them looked down at Kaya with the resigned patience of someone who had tried and failed to enforce rules before. "Back again, little star?" he asked. Kaya nodded solemnly and pointed at Jaren, the way one might present evidence in a trial. "I found him." The priest studied Jaren with an expression that suggested this was either very good news or extremely bad news, and he was still calculating the odds. Jaren attempted a respectful nod, but accidentally made it look like he'd swallowed a bug. "Hi. Hello. Yes. I am here voluntarily, I think." The priest blinked slowly, the universal sign for, "We'll let the universe decide what to do with you," and stepped aside. Inside, the chamber opened into a vast hall, lined with floating crystal panels displaying holographic constellations. Each constellation shifted as if breathing, forming and reforming the history of the Ashkari. Jaren tried not to stare, but it was difficult when one of the holograms seemed to be reenacting a dramatic argument between two ancient stars. Kaya moved ahead without hesitation, clearly unimpressed by technology that would have made most engineers burst into song. "Just to clarify," Jaren murmured, catching up, "is there an emergency protocol I should know about? Like a safe word? Or a button that releases confetti instead of alarms?" Kaya didn't look back. "The priest will guide you," she said, which was not comforting at all, mostly because the priests currently looked like they were debating whether to start praying or running. As they approached the inner corridor, a medical attendant intercepted them. An older Ashkari woman with silver hair braided into a crown and a face that suggested she had experience cleaning up other people's very large mistakes. "Your mother requested privacy," she told Kaya gently, then glanced at Jaren with the suspicious curiosity of someone evaluating a mysterious package. "And you must be the human who causes stress." Jaren opened his mouth to deny this, but Kaya helpfully confirmed, "He does." The attendant sighed in a way that implied she needed a vacation somewhere without sentient life, and motioned for Jaren to follow. They entered a narrow passage where soft blue light pulsed through the floor, matching the slow beat of distant machinery. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something floral, like a garden growing inside a star. Jaren cleared his throat. "So, just for my mental preparation, what exactly am I about to see? Because I've already experienced several emotional surprises today, and I'm operating at limited capacity." The attendant gave him a dry look. "You will not faint. The floor is very difficult to clean." He wasn't sure if that was reassurance or a threat, but it worked. He focused very intently on staying upright. They stepped into a circular chamber where translucent data threads floated like strands of light suspended in water. At the center stood a large crystalline console displaying medical readings in Ashkari script. Jaren recognized just enough to know the numbers were not the cheerful kind. The attendant spoke softly. "She survives only through the stasis matrix. Without intervention, the system will fail. Jaren tried to breathe normally, which turned out to be harder than piloting through asteroid debris. His voice sounded too thin, too human. Why me? The attendant's expression softened, though only slightly. Because her mind called for you. Even in unconsciousness, she repeated your name. This suggests unresolved resonance. Jaren rubbed his forehead. Great. I'm someone's unresolved resonance. That explains a lot about my dating history. Kaya reappeared beside him as quietly as a thought. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her small hand brushed his sleeve, grounding him more efficiently than any life support system. Jaren attempted a smile. You know, when I woke up this morning, the biggest problem on my list was a broken coolant pump. Now I'm apparently emotionally responsible for someone in a medical temple. I was not prepared for character development. Kaya tilted her head, ears lifting slightly. Mother said humans change only when the universe pushes them. Jaren grimaced. Of course she did. She always had excellent timing. The attendant gestured toward a final doorway. Go with her. You may not be ready, but time is not concerned with readiness. Jaren hesitated only long enough to consider running, which was useless since the past ran faster. He stepped forward, following Kaya into the glowing passage, and the door closed behind them with a soft, final sigh, as if the station itself knew this was the moment everything would begin again. The chamber was colder than Jaren expected. Not freezing, just the kind of chill that suggested the room took its job very seriously and didn't appreciate unnecessary body heat. The lights dimmed as he entered, as if trying to be dramatic on purpose. Jaren would have complained, but his voice got stuck somewhere between his chest and his dignity. At the center of the room stood a stasis cradle shaped from layered crystal, glowing softly like a captured sunrise. Inside, suspended in translucent light, was Elisara. For a moment, Jaren forgot that breathing was a basic biological requirement. She looked exactly as he remembered, and nothing like he remembered at all. Her features calm, serene, untouched by time, her long Ashkari ears resting against her hair, instead of moving with animated sarcasm. He stepped closer, careful not to trip over anything expensive-looking. Kaya stood beside him with the quiet confidence of someone introducing her parent to a teacher, who also happened to be unconscious and preserved by alien biotechnology. Jaren cleared his throat, which made a pathetic squeak instead of a respectable sound. Well, he whispered, she looks better than I do after a nap. Kaya didn't smile, but her ears twitched, which he took as measurable success. The stasis field hummed softly, synchronized with Elisara's slow, steady pulse. A panel flickered with alien symbols, some of which Jaren recognized as medical readings, and others that probably meant, do not poke. An Ashkari priest entered, robes shimmering like shifting nebulae. His expression was thoughtful, the look of someone debating how to explain a complex situation to a human who might panic, faint, or make jokes, all of which were statistically likely. She remains alive through the healing matrix, the priest said gently. Her body endures, but consciousness is distant. The radiation damage was severe. Jaren forced himself to nod, though the words pressed into him like gravity. So she's stuck between waking and not waking? The priest inclined his head. Her mind drifts in a protected state, but the stasis cannot hold forever. Jaren stared at the crystalline surface, wishing the universe came with a manual, preferably illustrated and written for emotionally incompetent pilots. What can I do, he asked, hoping the answer wouldn't involve surgery or heroic self-sacrifice. He had not mentally scheduled those activities. The priest gestured toward a nearby console, where thin strands of light floated like phosphorescent ribbons. There is a neural resonance interface, he explained. If someone with strong emotional connection speaks within her mind space, she may navigate back. Jaren blinked. Let me confirm I understand. You want me to talk to her brain? The priest considered this, then nodded. Yes, but gently. Jaren rubbed the back of his neck. Right, gently. I'm great at gentle. People say that all the time. Kaya raised one eyebrow, which communicated her opinion without speaking. The priest continued, undeterred by Jaren's growing horror. However, your mind must be linked through the interface. The process requires calm thought and emotional openness. Jaren stared at him. Fantastic. Just two things I'm famously terrible at. Kaya stepped closer to the cradle and placed her small hand against the crystal. She waited for you, she said, voice barely above a breath. She told me stories in her dreams about the human who promised to return. Jaren felt something inside him twist, uncomfortable and familiar, like old guilt waking from its own stasis. He placed his hand beside Kaya's, careful not to disturb anything. The surface was warm, not physically, but in a way that felt like memory. I didn't know she survived, he said softly. I thought. The words trailed off, because he had run out of ways to finish that sentence over the past 7 years. The priest activated the console, and the floating strands rearranged themselves into a circular pattern. When you are ready, place your hand in the interface field, he instructed. Your thoughts will be translated into her perception. Jaren looked at the glowing ring of light. Quick question, he said. Is there any chance this will cause my brain to exit my skull? The priest blinked. No. Okay, great, Jaren replied, because that was a deal breaker. He took a deep breath, which in his case meant a shallow inhale followed by mild panic, and extended his hand. The moment his fingers entered the light, the room dissolved. Not disappeared, but stretched into something vast and weightless. Jaren felt suspended, as if floating between stars. He saw fragments, shattered docking rings, sparks of fire. Elisara turning toward him with calm certainty before sealing the airlock. He tried to speak, but the memory didn't need words. It already knew how the story ended. Then the vision flickered, and everything rushed back into the room as abruptly as a door slamming. Jaren stumbled, catching himself on the console. Okay, he gasped. That was a lot. Do you have a less dramatic setting? Maybe introductory level? The priest shook his head, though his eyes softened. It will become easier with clarity. Kaya slipped her hand into his, small but steady. You did not run, she said, as if this were the highest possible achievement. Jaren exhaled slowly. Trust me, I thought about it. The priest stepped back. You may return, he said quietly. But know this, she heard you. Jaren stared at the stasis cradle, heart unsteady. He didn't know what came next. But for the first time in 7 years, the future didn't feel like a closed door. It felt like a beginning he hadn't expected, and one he wasn't sure he deserved. Jaren returned to the chamber the next day with the confident stride of someone who had spent the entire night rehearsing calmness and then failed spectacularly. His hair was doing something uncooperative. His shirt had lost the battle against wrinkles, and he carried the expression of a man who had recently learned that emotional openness was not optional for survival. Kaya walked beside him, perfectly composed, holding a small container that she had refused to explain. Jaren suspected it contained either sacred healing herbs or snacks, and he wasn't sure which option terrified him more. The priest greeted them with a serene nod that implied he had predicted Jaren's return through ancient wisdom, rather than the obvious fact that Jaren had nowhere else to go. The console lights glowed softly, as though the machinery itself had decided to act encouraging for once. Your first resonance attempt established connection, the priest said. Today you must strengthen it. Jaren tried to smile. Strengthen, yes. Very straightforward. Just like piloting through a collapsing wormhole while juggling. Kaya handed him the mysterious container. Eat, she ordered. He opened it cautiously and found a small, soft cube that smelled like mint and existential advice. What is this? He asked. Calming nutrient, Kaya replied. Mother said humans panic easily. Jaren stared at the cube. She remembered me too well. He took a bite, bracing for disaster, but it tasted harmless, like peppermint and mild regret. The priest motioned him toward the interface field. Jaren took a slow breath, reminding himself not to make jokes inside the neural link. Or at least, not as many. The moment his hand entered the light, the chamber dissolved again. But this time the transition felt smoother, like stepping into warm water instead of being thrown into it by cosmic forces with questionable manners. He found himself standing in a vast landscape, not real, but formed from memory and thought. The sky shimmered with stars arranged in patterns he almost recognized, constellations shifting like they were trying to offer helpful hints. Jaren whispered, though sound behaved strangely here. Elisara! Something moved at the edge of his perception, soft like a breath in the dark. He walked forward cautiously, because running in a subconscious mindscape seemed like a very bad idea. The ground beneath him glowed faintly with each step, as though the place itself needed reassurance that he existed. A familiar voice drifted through the space, not words, just tone, steady, patient, and undeniably hers. Jaren felt his chest tighten. "I'm here," he said, unsure whether he was speaking aloud or thinking loudly. A flicker of light formed ahead, then faded, as if distance and time still tangled around her mind. Jaren reached toward it, but the vision fractured, showing the same memory from before. Elisara sealing the airlock, her eyes calm in a way that made everything worse. He tried to speak through the memory, even though he knew she couldn't answer. "You could have waited another second," he said softly. "I was right there." The landscape rippled as if responding to his frustration, stars rearranging themselves into spirals and then dissolving. Jaren winced. Okay, emotional outburst noted. I'll keep it down." The ground suddenly shifted beneath him, not dangerously, just enough to suggest that the mind space had an opinion about his behavior. "Great," he muttered. "Even memories judge me." A pulse of warmth moved through the air, like someone laughing without sound, and for a second he felt something unmistakable. Recognition. Then the connection snapped, and he was pulled abruptly back into the chamber. He staggered, but the priest caught his arm before he face-planted into the console. "Your resonance increased," the priest observed. "Her awareness stirs." Jaren rubbed his eyes. "Good. Excellent. Meanwhile, I feel like someone wrung out my brain and hung it up to dry." Kaya inspected him like a scientist evaluating a test subject. "You lasted longer this time. That is improvement." Jaren sighed. "Yes, I leveled up in emotional vulnerability. Please alert the universe." The priest adjusted the console gently. "You must return tomorrow. The connection cannot be forced." Jaren nodded, though every muscle in his body insisted that lying down for 12 hours sounded like a far better plan. As they left the chamber, Kaya walked silently beside him. After several steps, she spoke without looking up. "She heard you." Jaren swallowed hard. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think I heard her too." They reached the outer hall where the holographic constellations continued their endless shifting. Jaren paused, staring up at them, not because he found sudden cosmic meaning, but because it helped him avoid crying in public. Kaya tugged lightly at his sleeve. "Humans leak from the eyes when sad," she stated helpfully. Jaren nodded. "Yes, it's a design flaw." Kaya considered this. "Mother said flaws make humans interesting." Jaren exhaled a laugh that didn't entirely hurt. "Then I must be fascinating." Together they walked back into the glow of the station, and though nothing had resolved, the weight on his chest felt just a little less impossible, as if somewhere, in the quiet space between waking and drifting, Elisara had turned her head toward him. Jaren woke the next morning with the distinct sensation that gravity had increased out of spite. His body ached in places he didn't know could ache, including what he suspected was his emotional skeleton. The station lights outside his guest quarters shifted into simulated dawn, which would have been peaceful if the wall panel hadn't greeted him with a cheerful notification. Neural resonance session scheduled. He muttered something that was not technically a complaint, but sounded very complaint adjacent, and dragged himself upright. Instead of going straight to the medical temple, he wandered toward the central ring, telling himself he needed to mentally prepare, which in practical terms meant delaying his inevitable emotional meltdown. Haven's Reach was already bustling. Refugees, traders, engineers arguing with repair drones that clearly resented their existence. Jaren passed a maintenance bot struggling to tighten a loose panel, using what appeared to be enthusiasm instead of proper tools. "Story of my life," he muttered. The bot beeped in agreement, which was both alarming and comforting. He stopped at a hydration kiosk where a vendor with 3 cybernetic eyes offered drinks labeled with concerning names like Stellar Cleanse and Nebula Flush. Jaren chose something that sounded least likely to liquefy him from the inside. As he sipped, he overheard fragments of conversation. People from Antares Prime remembering the evacuation, speaking of Elisara not as a tragic figure, but as the navigator who stayed calm while stars died. One refugee, an older man leaning on a makeshift cane, said quietly, "She held the course steady. If she had panicked, none of us would have made it." Jaren nearly choked on his drink. He had spent years convincing himself that leaving her behind was failure. Now the universe was casually informing him she had been a hero without him. Before he spiraled into another internal crisis, Kaye appeared at his side like a small blue ghost, with impeccable timing. "You are late," she announced. Jaren blinked. "Good morning to you, too." Kaya held up a nutrient cube identical to yesterday's. "Eat." Jaren stared at it suspiciously. "Are these supposed to calm me or silence me permanently?" Kaya considered. "Both would be useful." He sighed and swallowed the cube, which tasted like confidence and distant disappointment. Together they walked back toward the temple district. The priest watched Jaren with the expression of people observing a wild animal that might either sit calmly or run headfirst into a wall. The console pulsed softly, waiting. Jaren took a steadying breath, an attempt at composure that ended up sounding like a deflating air filter, and placed his hand into the interface. The transition happened instantly. This time the mindscape resembled a quiet shoreline beneath a sky full of motionless stars. Waves rolled in without sound, dissolving into light instead of foam. Jaren had never been here, yet it felt familiar, like a dream he used to visit before waking. A figure stood at the water's edge. Not clear, just a silhouette shaped by memory. Jaren approached, careful not to overwhelm the fragile scene. "Elisara," he said softly. The figure didn't turn, but the air shifted, warm and aware. He spoke again, slower. "You don't have to come all the way back at once. I'm still catching up too." The silhouette flickered, then became clearer. Not fully formed, just enough for him to make out the curve of her long ears and the faint glow around her hair. She didn't speak, but Jaren felt something like amusement, gentle, familiar, the emotional equivalent of an eye roll. "I know," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I took 7 years. I'm aware that's not ideal. I've never been great with deadlines." The stars above shifted, forming a faint spiral, and the light around her brightened. She raised her hand, not quite touching him, but the gesture was unmistakable. Recognition, not accusation. The mindscape rippled suddenly, as if something outside was pulling her away. Jaren reached forward without thinking. "Wait, just stay a little longer." The shoreline dissolved, the sky fractured, and he was expelled from the link like a piece of emotional cargo. He stumbled backward and landed ungracefully. Kaya's face appeared above him, upside down and deeply unimpressed. "You fell again," she observed. Jaren groaned. "Yes, thank you for the scientific analysis." The priest helped him sit up. Her awareness grows stronger. She begins to respond. Jaren wiped his face. "Good, because I'm starting to feel like a badly written romance hologram." Kaya took his hand, not gently, just firmly, as if dragging him back to reality by force. "You must return tomorrow," she said. "Mother is trying to wake up." Jaren nodded slowly. He didn't know what he would say next time, or whether he would cry, or joke, or both at once, which seemed increasingly likely. But as they left the chamber, something felt different. Not lighter, but steadier. For the first time, he wasn't only fighting the past, he was moving towards something, and though he still had absolutely no idea how to handle it, he finally understood why Elisara had held on this long. Not for survival, not for duty. She had been waiting for the moment he stopped running. Jaren returned for the next session pretending he was perfectly fine, which fooled absolutely no one, including a cleaning drone that scanned him and announced he had elevated stress levels and unfortunate posture. Kaya walked beside him carrying yet another calming nutrient cube, which Jaren accepted with the resigned grace of a man who had lost control of his own dietary future. The priest greeted them with the same calm expression as always, though Jaren suspected he was silently preparing emergency equipment, just in case Jaren's emotions exploded again. The console lights pulsed in soft rhythm, like the chamber itself was taking steady breaths on Elisara's behalf. Jaren placed his hand into the interface before he could talk himself out of it. The shift into the mindscape was instantaneous. No dizziness, no dramatic light show. just a smooth transition that made him wonder if the machinery had updated its settings to gentler for humans. The shoreline was gone. Instead, he stood inside what resembled a starship corridor, except the walls were made of light and memory rather than metal. Every surface glowed with soft luminescence, as though the place was remembering itself while still trying to exist. Jaren took a cautious step, and the floor formed beneath him only once he committed to moving, which was not reassuring at all. A figure stood ahead, not a silhouette this time, but a faint outline with more shape than before. Jaren's breath caught, and for once he did not attempt humor. "Elisera," he said quietly. The figure turned its head, and though her features were still blurred, the movement was unmistakably hers. The calm tilt, the subtle patience, the long ears shifting slightly as if registering a familiar voice. Jaren stepped closer, though he half expected the scene to collapse the moment he tried. "I know," he said, forcing the words out slowly. "I'm late. 7 years late. I'm aware there should be consequences." The figure flickered, and a soft pulse rippled through the corridor. Something like amusement, something like breath. Jaren swallowed hard. "You saved 300 people, including children. I know that now." The corridor lights brightened as if her awareness leaned toward him, listening. "But you also almost died alone in the dark. And I didn't know. I would have—" His voice cracked, which was unfortunate, because cracking in front of someone who wasn't fully conscious felt like an overachievement. A faint voice brushed through the air, not fully formed words, more like thoughts shaped into sound. It carried the familiar cadence of someone who had always been better at staying calm than he ever managed. The sound made his knees wobble. He tried to laugh, even though it came out shaky. "You don't have to tease me already. I'm emotionally fragile. There should be a warning label." Another pulse of warmth rolled through the space. Gentle, unmistakable recognition. Her outline grew clearer, revealing the faint shimmer of her hair, the elegant line of her ears, the quiet strength in her posture. Suddenly the corridor trembled, like a system straining under power it wasn't ready to handle. Jaren felt the pull, the same force that had ripped him out before. "No, stay with me," he said quickly, extending his hand. This time, instead of reaching toward nothing, he felt something. Light brushing against his palm, not solid, but real enough to steal every breath he had. Then the resonance surged and the connection snapped. Jaren collapsed back into the physical chamber, catching himself on one elbow. His vision spun, and someone was talking, though it took a moment to translate sound into meaning. The priest knelt beside him, adjusting the console with urgent precision. "Her consciousness stabilizes," he said, "but the strain affects both of you. You must rest." Jaren nodded, though rest sounded like a suggestion invented by people who didn't have collapsing emotions to manage. Kaya hovered nearby, gripping her sleeve so tightly the fabric might file a complaint. "You heard her," she said, voice barely steady. Jaren managed a breath that resembled a laugh. "I think she insulted me, which is comforting." Kaya blinked. "Why?" Jaren leaned his head back against the console. "Because it means she's still herself." The priest dimmed the chamber lights. "One more session may be enough, but understand, when the final resonance begins, she will either wake or the stasis will fail." Jaren's stomach performed an impressive acrobatic maneuver he did not authorize. "No pressure," he muttered. "Just the emotional fate of two people and the medical equivalent of a coin toss." Kaya placed her hand over his, small but steady. "Mother believed you would return," she whispered. "She did not wait for hope. She waited for certainty." Jaren stared at the stasis cradle, at the woman suspended between life and memory. "Then tomorrow," he said quietly, "I stopped being afraid." They left the chamber together, moving through the quiet halls where holographic constellations shifted like patient witnesses. For the first time, Jaren didn't feel like he was walking toward the past. He was walking towards someone who was still holding on. Jaren stood outside the chamber longer than necessary, because entering a room where someone might wake from 7 years of suspended existence felt like the kind of activity one should ease into, preferably with snacks and emotional safety gear. Kaya waited beside him, holding no nutrient cube this time, which was somehow more alarming than all previous cubes combined. Her long ears were lifted slightly, a silent signal that today mattered in a way words couldn't handle. Jaren exhaled slowly, squared his shoulders, and stepped forward before his courage realized what was happening and escaped through the nearest ventilation unit. The chamber lights brightened as he entered, not dramatically, just a gentle shift, like someone opening a window in a quiet room. The priest stood ready at the console, his calm expression unchanged, though his hands hovered just a fraction closer to the controls. Jaren didn't need translation. That was the universal body language of someone prepared to intervene if everything went spectacularly wrong. He approached the stasis cradle, and for the first time, looking at Ella Sarah didn't feel like staring at a memory trapped in glass. It felt like looking at someone paused mid-sentence, ready to continue. Jaren placed his hand into the resonance field without hesitation. The transition came instantly, not a pull or a fall, but a simple step into a place that felt almost real. The corridor of light reformed, clearer than before. The air carried warmth, and the walls no longer flickered like uncertain memory. Ella Sarah stood at the far end, not fading, not fractured, but fully formed in a way that made Jaren's chest hurt and steady at the same time. Her long ears shifted slightly as she turned, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Jaren tried to start with something meaningful, but his brain offered nothing except panic. "Hi," he said, which was not historically known as a profound emotional opener. Ella Sarah blinked slowly, the way she always used to when deciding whether to laugh at him or encourage him to try again. Her voice reached him gently, shaped like thought, but unmistakably her own. "You took your time," she said. Jaren released a breath that might have been a laugh or the sound of his heart rebooting. "Yeah," he admitted. "I got lost, emotionally. Also literally. Haven's Reach needs better signage." The corridor brightened, responding to her awareness, and the light around them steadied. Jaren stepped closer, speaking without rushing, because there were no seconds left to waste. "You saved everyone," he said. "I should have known you survived. I should have tried harder. I should have—" Ella Sarah lifted her hand, and the gesture stopped every apology still trying to escape him. "You lived," she replied. "So did I. We are here. That is enough." Jaren wanted to argue, but for the first time he didn't need to. He nodded instead, feeling something inside him finally loosen its grip. The mindscape shifted gently, not collapsing, just changing, stars forming above like a new sky. Ellie Sarah stepped nearer, and though their hands didn't quite touch, the space between them felt small in a way it hadn't for 7 years. "You can wake now," he whispered. "If you want to." Her expression softened. "I have been waiting for you to stop running." Jaren closed his eyes for a moment. "I'm done," he said quietly. "I'm here." The resonance surged, not violently, but like a steady heartbeat finding its rhythm. Light flooded the corridor, warm and bright, dissolving everything into a soft brilliance that felt like sunrise more than ending. Jaren opened his eyes back in the chamber. The stasis cradle lights flickered, then faded, and for one terrifying second, no one breathed. Then Ella Sarah inhaled, slow, uneven, but real. Her eyes opened, searching, unfocused at first, then steadying on the two faces waiting for her. Kaya stood frozen, caught between disbelief and hope so fierce it looked painful. Ella Sarah's gaze softened, and she reached weakly toward her daughter. Kaya took her hand with both of hers, as if anchoring the universe back into place. Jaren remained where he was, not moving forward, because suddenly he didn't know if he deserved that distance to close. Ella Sarah turned her head and found him anyway. Her voice was faint but unmistakably amused. "You still look tired," she whispered. Jaren let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh and not quite a sob. "I've had a long week." The priest adjusted the monitors, confirming stability with a quiet nod. The danger had passed. The waiting was over. Later, when Ella Sarah rested in recovery and the chamber lights dimmed to gentle twilight, Jaren stepped onto the balcony overlooking the star-filled abyss. The view looked different now, not like an endless escape route, but like a place where things continued instead of ending. Kaya joined him, standing close but silent. After a moment, she spoke softly. "She will live." Jaren nodded. "So will we." He didn't know exactly what came next, whether he would stay on Haven's Reach or rebuild a life that wasn't made of guilt and distance. But he knew he wouldn't disappear again, Not from Elisara, not from Kaya, not from himself. For the first time in 7 years, Jaron Moss was not a man running from a promise. He was someone who had finally kept one.